Hello.
Hello, glad to see you answered this time.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
It's all right, it's all right. Well, great to be speaking to you. Incidentally, just not that long ago, I interviewed Claudia Helmke Miller, who said she has recently been listening to a lot of your work. So, synchronistically speaking, it's appropriate that I have you on the the show now. So, yeah, even though I've been just got back from Arizona from TOLC, the Andromeda Council of Contact, the Representatives Conference, and even though I only got 2 hours of sleep on the airplane yesterday, I still have a lot of energy because I checked my horoscope. It said I'll have a lot of energy no matter what today, and so I don't really feel fatigued or anything, even though I'm sleep deprived and also I feel very energized and ready to go. And I'm looking forward to this interview very, very much, especially since you were sick and all that, and I had to cancel because of some things I didn't quite pay attention to. Sorry about that. So great to have you on. Without further ado, let's get started. Um,
Okay.
Okay, so I see that looking at your YouTube channel, you've been on YouTube for a long time. I went to the videos thing and did the sort by thing by most popular because I thought maybe the most popular videos were the ones worth talking about the most, but I see that the most popular ones are the oldest ones that are 9 years old. You've been on YouTube for a while, so I think maybe it would be better throughout the course of this interview for me to keep your YouTube channel videos up and look at the more recent videos and scan over them, and whichever ones have interesting and worthwhile topics that are worth discussing in the present day at the present moment, and also for what could be in the future. That's probably the way we'll do it. But first, I want, for those that haven't heard about you, well, this is on your YouTube channel. Excuse me, your website, magentapixie.com. You do have about Magenta Pixie and also the Nine. So I mean, I want to try to keep this my show as educational as and informative as possible. Although I do often give my guests a chance to give their life stories at the beginning. But when I ask them to do that, I do ask, please try to do it from the standpoint of a primary source to keep it educational and explain the things that you experienced that educated you and taught you, okay, this is the stuff I need to tell the world. So why don't you tell your life story from a primary source standpoint, and then after you give a nice, decent, abridged but decent version of all the stuff you have on your website here, please give us a nice abridged but yet detailed description of the entities known as the nine white-winged beings who you keep in contact with. So you got the floor on this.
Okay. Would you like me to talk about the experiences that I've been through that are connected to making this connection with the nine right from the beginning, or shall I just talk about the evolution with the nine and who and what they are?
I guess both.
Okay. All right. Well, I've talked about that before, so I'll be brief because obviously I don't want to go over old ground that other people can go and access elsewhere. But each time I tell this story, something different comes out anyway. So I guess starting off very, very young, I was about 4 or 5. My father was an actor and opera singer, but he was also doing hypnotherapy. He'd started off learning by doing stage hypnotist stuff with the cast of the company that he was with before he went into hypnotherapy, and he was sort of practicing on me, I think. I was about 4 or 5, and I do remember him taking me into hypnosis at a very young age, and he was hypnotizing me to well, I remember being in a bubble. I remember this was my first sort of spiritual experience, and I guess I was 3 or 4. I may even have been younger. But he hypnotized me, and my memory is that I was in a bubble above my body, and I was actually inside like an orb looking down at my body sitting on the ground. So I was very, very young, and that was kind of the first experience. Around about 5, I remember I had headaches a lot and earaches as a child. My dad would come into my room, and he would take my headaches away. He had this silver ring, and he would say, my ring is magic. If you touch it, it will get very hot. And I would touch it, and the ring would burn my hand, and I would drop it. And then he would put the ring to my head and say, the warmth of the ring will take your headache away. And it worked. So the reason why I'm getting to this is to say that the nine tell me that all star seeds have been trained for the job that they're doing since birth. So you might look back in your life and see some strange and interesting things occurring in your life at some time and wonder why that happened to me. I wonder why this person came into my life, or I wonder why this person did this. And of course, all these experiences, all these events are part of your sort of training. And somebody who would be in a position or as channel, as a messenger for higher dimensional entities, they would be trained in, their psychic awareness from birth. So this is kind of why I'm talking about this. And then fast forward, I think I was about 7. My father got into, no, I would have been about 6. My father got into ESP, and my mother got into it as well. And they were very heavily into these ESP cards. And they had like wavy lines or a triangle or a square, and you had to put the card in front of you so you couldn't see the card, and then the subject would then have to guess what the card, or pick up what the shape is on the card, and then they would write down the score. And they did this on me when I was 6. And I don't remember, I was so young. I just remember, okay, I have to just try and guess what the shape is. And I remember seeing the shape in my mind and telling them. And all I can remember is my mum and dad with their mouth open, sort of saying, no, she can't have got that. It must be a fluke. And I remember thinking, have I done something wrong? Or, are you still there, by the way?
Yes, and I'm on
Oh,
mute.
you are. It's, I'm asking because your setup, your like microphone is so good that when you're not there, I can't hear any static or anything. I just hear
That's 'cause I'm
silence.
on mute.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay. That's good. Silly me. So, yeah. So I remember sitting there thinking they were so, my parents were so sort of shocked and dumbfounded and kept checking the score and saying, no, this can't be right. And I remember thinking, being a bit afraid, have I done something wrong? Because they weren't talking to me, they were talking to each other. Eventually, obviously, as I got older, we talked about this, and apparently my scores were consistently high when I was a child. So that was around up to about 6. My parents split up after that, and so I didn't have that same close interaction. So I was getting constant magical stuff going on with my father. In fact, my entire relationship with him was working in that way, in that realm, because he was busy. He was an opera singer and an actor and off on tour and on stage, and he didn't have a lot of time to spend with his children. And when he did have time and I wanted his attention, it would be about this sort of work that we did. And so I would want to please him, so I would make sure that I was picking things up and doing what he wanted me to do. So the training started when I was very young. When I was 7, I remember I had this vision of me being someone else. I'd never heard of reincarnation at the age of 7, but I knew that I was somebody else and I'd been in another body, and that I could do things in that particular lifetime. I was able to be telekinetic. I could move things with my mind. I remembered moving things. I remember being very frustrated with this reality, that it just I couldn't do the things that I used to be able to do. And I knew that that life was teeming with, the universe was teeming with life. I knew that there was life on other planets. I had no doubt about it. And, whenever it would come up when I was young and people would say, oh, do you believe in aliens or extraterrestrials? I would be so baffled why other people wouldn't believe, because to me, I just knew, very, very young. Again, this is something the majority, if not all, starseeds will have felt the same way when they were children. They just know. It's something, you come in with this particular genetic marker, if you like, that's online. So you don't forget. You aren't able to necessarily translate what that means, but you don't forget these things. You don't forget these knowings. So these were the strange occurrences as a child. I would sit at the bottom of the garden and I would sense entities and energies, and I perceived those energies as being fairies, because that's how I would have interpreted them at such a young age. All little girls are interested in fairies. But I would actually sit at the bottom of the garden and beg them to talk to me. And I would say, I know you're there. Why won't you show yourself to me? I won't tell anyone, because I knew that they had to remain hidden and that they couldn't show themselves. I was aware of this. I could pick up what they were feeling. And I would literally sit in the bottom of the garden crying. I was a very strange child from my mother's perspective. When my father was kind of out of the picture and she was with someone else who was much more mainstream, she saw me as a very strange child. I mean, you've got the 7-year-old sitting at the bottom of the garden crying for no apparent reason, and I wouldn't tell her why I was crying. But it was very difficult for me in that respect as a child, because I expected to be able to have what I'd had before in these other lifetimes, and I knew that this world was different, and sometimes I just didn't like it. I didn't like this reality, and I found it very difficult to ground myself. I found it very difficult to come into the body. I lived in my imagination. I told myself stories all the time. I read books, Enid Blyton books, all the time. So that was me as a child. I was just not on this planet. But I sort of came down to earth a little bit more around 9, when I joined a local drama group, and that's where I found kindred spirits. I knew at the age of about 7 or 8 that I had to find a group of people. There's this whole bunch of people that are like me, and I'm supposed to find them and connect with them. The 9 have since told me that there's a certain again, this genetic marker, this code, that all starseeds will be aware of the Great Gathering. They will be aware of the networking, but it's supposed to come online around a certain time. If it comes online a bit too early, or if you're born with it, it can be very, very difficult for you, because it's not the time yet to go into that Great Gathering. And with me, I had that knowing from around the age of 8, 7 or 8, and it wasn't time. It wasn't time for the Great Gathering, so I was heartbroken, really, looking for these people. And when I found drama, it was the nearest thing. These were the drama people, and they were nearer to being like me than the other people were. And so I was able to come into my body then. I was able to come into my reality and focus a little bit, because I'd found a small group of kindred spirits. Around the age of 11, my father was continually taking me into hypnosis, but when I was younger, it was more like he was sort of testing out his skills on me, kind of. But by the time I was 11, he had become a hypnotherapist and had been working with clients. By this time, he wasn't doing the stage hypnotist stuff anymore, and I couldn't swim, so he took me into hypnosis to plant a suggestion that I would be able to learn to swim. And while I was in hypnosis, something happened to me, and this is pretty common nowadays with like teachings like Dolores Cannon and everything. But back then, my father, in all the research he'd done and with all the clients he'd never seen it. What actually happened to me was, it was like there was a split taking place within me, and one part of me was moving away, sort of down into this sort of almost like it was a no time zone, like a cloud, and this other part of me, or this other entity, was coming forward, and then this particular part of me would then communicate with my father and explain to him why I couldn't swim, why I was finding it difficult at school, what was happening, what would happen. So I was kind of channeling at the age of 11 in hypnosis, and my father, for him, he'd never heard of anyone answering back. He'd had all these clients, and he'd taken them into hypnosis for things like, to quit smoking and for traumas and that sort of thing. He'd never done anything like past life regression. So there was no talking back. I know that happens. That's a form of hypnosis that we're well aware of now, but back then he didn't know of this. And this was the very first time that I was aware that there was another entity within me, or that could come into me, or that was around me. My father told me what was happening was, it's your subconscious mind. When you're in hypnosis, your subconscious mind has come to the fore. Which is what normally happens when you are either in deep trance, deep hypnosis, or asleep. But to me, it was an entity. It wasn't an entity to my father, because he was looking at this in a psychological, scientific analysis. But to me, it was an entity, and I was only 11, so I called this entity Subby. And I loved him. It was a male entity. So he would come through and talk. So that went on for a while. And then things went a little bit sort of quiet on the spiritual front. My father, didn't visit as much, and I was heavily into the drama. So doing drama helped me to go into that world, and writing as well. And I was writing children's stories, and I won a story competition. And so I was in that world. And so fast forward really to the end of my marriage, I would have been probably just before I was 30. I would have been in my late 20s. I was with my husband, and our communication, it wasn't good from my perspective at that time. And the reason why it wasn't is because when I spoke to him, I would see these wavy lines like metal rods. They would shoot out of my head and they would go above his head and off somewhere else. And they wouldn't go into his head. And when I was speaking to my father, when I would go and talk to him, the metal rods went directly into my father's head. And then I would see them coming out of his head going into mine. So this was my interpretation of energetic frequency that we would interpret as communication. But I made the big mistake of saying to my husband, I can see these silver lines and they're shooting out of my head and they're not going into your head. Why aren't they going into your head? So this kind of stuff really kind of ended our marriage. My poor ex-husband, bless him, he was such a sweet man, but I was just having all this stuff happening. And so that was the next sort of stage of awakening for me. There were entities in the house. Furniture was being turned upside down. I was really scared. I got a medium in. There was all sorts happening. Take me all night to explain it all. But when I went into this in a more controlled way, we had split up. I'd left my husband, and I think it was about a year after our separation. All these things intensified when I moved out of the relationship, but they weren't pleasant. I had a lot of dark experiences. I was in shadow realms. I was seeing very dark entities, one entity telling me he's the devil. I actually felt I was being sucked into this hell dimension by monsters. I mean, I had all sorts going on. And I could sense what other people were thinking, but I didn't want to. I was trying to push it all away, and I was fearful. So obviously I was opening up to darker realities. I got involved with a group of people that were heavy drug takers. I didn't take the same things. I didn't take what they were taking. But what I would do is I had this friend who was he was really well known in the sort of drug scene at that time. I don't know if you want to go ahead and, publish this or not. It's not something I normally talk about. But he wouldn't tell his friends that he was friends with me because I was just this sort of dizzy girl, really. And, these were sort of hardened sort of drug people, and they were all sort of really hard men and everything. But we had this kind of connection where I could go into his trip with him and hold his hand, and I could experience what he was experiencing without having taken the substance that he'd taken. And I could see what he was seeing. And what I would do was I would take sort of half of it. Sometimes I'd take 20% or 50% if he was really bad. And it got to the stage where he would do it again. He kept taking the stuff, and I kept saying, don't take it. It's giving you really bad experiences and it's harming you. But he would say, yeah, I won't take it anymore. And then he did. And then he would call for me. Someone would come and find me. I'd be in the area somewhere in a pub or whatever, and someone would say, this person needs you, and I'd rush to his house and I'd sit with him and I'd go into the trip and I'd take. So no one taught me this. I didn't know how to do this, but I knew how to take energy from him or change his energy. I knew how to see what he was seeing. The reason why I'm explaining this is it's such a huge training ground. So you asked the question, sort of tell me your story. It's such a huge training ground that you go through that starts from birth. Every starseed will have been trained from birth repeatedly over and over again. And you don't know it's happening at the time. And it can be so confusing. And yet when you look back, you think, my goodness me, my entire life has led up to what I'm doing now. So that was another big, big training. And then things were quite dark. And then I remember getting to the point where I just couldn't take any more. I was taken to my absolute limit of all this psychic stuff. And obviously I was sharing bad trips with people who were taking substances. So that wasn't really good for me, even though on the other hand, I was being very quickly and intensively trained. But I didn't know that. And I remember sitting outside the pub that you call a bar in America, on the curb with my feet in the road. and I just was staring at the pavement. It was late at night, no cars came down there. It was a very quiet little village that I lived in at the time. And little did I know, my brother had just performed his set. He was with a band, a lead singer. Didn't realise he was performing that night. And somebody saw me and went in and said, "Your sister is sat in the road looking at the pavement, and she looks terrible," or whatever it is he said. Next thing, my brother came and sat with me. Well, my brother's 4 years younger than me. We'd argued through our entire childhood, and I never, ever opened up to him about my experiences. I wasn't interested in what he was doing. Yes, we shared a little bit of a connection when my father took us into a hypnosis together, but that was about it. I had never really discussed anything with him, and he said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Oh, you wouldn't understand." And he said, "Try me." So I said, okay, and I told him I can sense what people are thinking in the room. I can feel everybody's feelings, and this is happening and that's happening, and there's monsters and blah, blah, blah. And he said to me, "You are spiritually awakening. You're waking up spiritually, and you're not controlling it. You need to find a way to control it." And I couldn't believe he knew this. Well, little did I know that he'd been studying sort of Zen wisdom and Buddhism and spirituality and meditation for several years, since he was about 16. And, you know, I'm in my late 20s, so he's only 4 years younger than me. So he knew all this stuff, and I didn't. But obviously he hadn't had the experiences. He'd learnt everything, and I was the one that was going through the experiences and didn't know what was happening to me. So he told me to go home and ask, just literally ask for what you want, and you will get it. And I thought, okay. So I did. I went home, I sat on the end of my bed, and I asked, and I said, "If there's anything out there or anyone that wants to come to me, are you trying to communicate with me? Am I supposed to do something? I'm ready, you know, come to me." And literally from that day, everything changed. Everything changed, and I moved into the lighter realms, the realms of joy and bliss and synchronicity. Everything changed from that moment. So I went into a new phase of training, a much more conscious phase of training. The very next day, the larger flat, which I know you call an apartment in America, the larger apartment became available. I was only in a small bedsit, and I wanted to move into this larger apartment because it was gorgeous, you know, compared to the one I had, but I couldn't afford it on my own. So I asked loads and loads of friends if they would rent with me, and none of them were free to do this. And I remember going home and I said to my brother, "I really wanted this flat, you know, this apartment, but I can't afford it, and nobody wants to share with me. I'm going to have to let it go." And he said, "Well, I'll come and share with you." And I just looked at him and I thought, on the one hand, how on earth could I live with my brother? Because we had argued through our entire childhood. I mean, awful arguments and fights and everything. And on the other hand, I just knew this was like a destiny, and I was meant to be with him. I was meant to move in with him. And that's what happened. And from then on, the two of us together, every single day, we went into conscious training. We spoke to a being that was in the apartment. That's when I started channeling. And what actually happened there was I started to write stuff. It was all a bit jumbled and crazy. But then I read this book called Channeling. It actually fell out of a bookshelf in a shop and sort of launched itself at me. So I read it. And I tried the exercises in that book, which were meditations to help you to make a connection to your spirit guide. So that's what I was doing. I was looking for this spirit guide, and it took a while, and there were all these different false guides and different experiences. And finally, I made this connection with this amazing being. And people say to me, "How do you know? How do you know that you're with a being of light?" It's very difficult to explain the answer to that question. The knowing is in every pore of your entire being. It washes over you with such bliss, you just can't explain how you know. So that came to me. I would go into meditation, ask this entity, this light being. He told me he was a fifth dimensional being. His name was White Spirit, and he explained to me lots and lots of things, and he would tell me these things in meditation, and I would come out of meditation and tell my brother what I'd experienced, and he would then ask tons and tons of questions, because all of the learning that he'd done and all the books he'd read, he wanted answers. He started talking about physics and and quantum mechanics, and I didn't understand what he was talking about. He was talking about timelines. I'd go back into meditation and ask White Spirit the question, and I'd get the answer, and I'd come out and tell my brother. And one day my brother asked me a really, really complicated question about, timelines and quantum mechanics. And I'm trying to remember what he's asking me. And I'm thinking, I'm not even going to remember this question. It's so complicated. And then all of a sudden, it was like there was this click, this switch in my mind. And it was almost like my reality just flipped. And there was White Spirit. And I was awake with my eyes open. I wasn't in meditation. And I remember saying to my brother, he's here. White Spirit's here. I can see him. I can feel him. And that's when everything opened. The chakras. I could feel my chakras. I didn't even know what chakras were when this was happening. I just knew that there were these energy centers in my body that I could feel, and they opened up. I could see him in the psychic space. He wasn't in the apartment as a manifested being, but the sight, the inner sight and the outer reality is superimposed as one. I now know what's happened, and that the subconscious mind and the conscious mind, those two aspects, right brain hemisphere, left brain hemisphere, they work together simultaneously instead of alternately. So when you go to sleep, you've got your subconscious mind at the fore and your conscious mind at the back, and when you're awake, the conscious mind is at the fore and the subconscious mind's at the back. When you channel or when you experience other realities superimposed onto this reality, the brain, these hemispheres are working together. And the 9 call this the beyond the theta brainwave state. I know other channels have mentioned this as alpha waves. The 9 say beyond the theta because what's happening to me, it isn't categorized in any measurable sense, or what happens to other starseeds that go through these experiences. The brain waves are not fully understood, so the 9 are saying that beyond the theta is the best way to explain what's happened to your brain waves. So that's when I started to speak to White Spirit with my eyes open, and I didn't have to go into meditation to talk to him anymore. And he kind of answered all our questions, and some of the questions he didn't know the answer to, so he would, hold on, I'll find out the answer, and he'd disappear, and he'd go up this ladder into this other part of this other dimension where I couldn't see him, and then he'd come back down and tell me the answer, and I'd say, where did you go? And he would explain that he's got guides, and he would talk about dimensional layers and all this stuff. And, fast forward quite a while, and I don't actually remember when it was the 9. I think it was after the millennium, so I think it was around 2001, when I was speaking to a friend of mine who was a very spiritually aware guy, and he had also taken me through yet another level of training, which is just too intense to go into. But he said to me, can you please ask your guides this question? So I said, what do you mean guides? I've only got one guide. And he said, oh no, they're always a collective. I said, are they? He said, yes, and you need to know that. And within days of realizing that they are always a collective, I was told that White Spirit would be leaving and another guide would be stepping in. I was very upset about this, but then I was also told that White Spirit wasn't leaving. White Spirit was upgrading, and it was the next dimensional level that I would be communicating with. And all this was another change in my own expansion and in my own brain waves and chemicals and chakras and all that. So nothing was really stopping and changing. And that's a big one to understand, because we translate everything into a linear sense, and we can get quite upset and frightened about things that happen, like the whole 2012 end of the world thing. People translate the energies correctly. Yes, it was the end of one phase and the beginning of another, and this is a continuous pattern that occurs in an ascension process, but we translate it as the end of and the beginning of, and it isn't. It's just a series of changes and upgrades occurring within our entire makeup. So that's what happened to me, and so that was an experience that occurred over a few days, a short period of time. I would shut myself away. I wouldn't go out anywhere. I wouldn't see anyone while I was going through this intense internal process. I had children, so I had to sort of get on and look after them and still be going through this process at the same time. And it's challenging and beautiful and difficult all at the same time. And then I was with this entity that looked like an angel with white wings and a long white robe. Sometimes the face would look like a bird's face, a white bird with a sort of a very strange looking bird. I've never seen a bird like that, actually, with a sort of funny beak. But anyway, and then sometimes there would, the entity would be male with long hair, or a female. That was much less likely. It was nearly always male, unless there was real need for me to connect with the female form, and then I would have this divine feminine entity with me. And sometimes he would be just like a guy with jeans and a t-shirt on. And that was when he was teaching me that he was equal to me. He wasn't a master. So when I saw this being as an angel, I would be in sort of awe and think, it can't be an angel. I can't be communicating with an angel. And I would want to get on my knees and just worship this being and what are you doing here talking to me? And that's when he would be a guy in a white t-shirt and blue jeans. And he'd say, get off your knees. Don't worship me. Let's have a chat. That kind of thing. And then very soon afterwards, they morphed. The entity morphed into 9. Into several, actually. It was lots. And I couldn't see all of them, but I counted. And the ones I could see were 9. They were much more obvious to me that there were 9. But I realized after a while of working with them that this is a collective of many. And it's really a geometric mathematical formula presented in a form that I could understand. If White Spirit as a human form had morphed into a geometric structure with lights coming out of him, it would have been too much for me. I wouldn't have been able to accept that. And the 9 didn't want me to go too far forward. Everything was done in stages. This is the ascension process. This is how it happens. Your training occurs in stages. And so when I was then with the 9, only when I asked the question, so you've morphed from this stage to this stage and this stage, is there another stage? I mean, am I now seeing your true form? They would say, no, we can't show you our true form, but we can show you the nearest thing to it. And do you want to see it? This is how the communication would go. So I would say yes. And then they would show me that they are, visually, they are light. If we were to perceive them in sound, because all our senses are just translators for the same energy, the same frequency, we would hear them as a symphony or a tone or a sound, a vibration. There are certain colors and lights that we can't see in our spectrum physically that I can see in the inner realm that they are, and the sound of them as well. So they're light and sound, their frequency. So they would explain all this to me and I would see what they were. I've always been more comfortable working with the 9 as the 9 beings. But in the last few years, I am okay with the non-physical form as well. It's all one to me now because it's been so long. But anyone who's newly channeling, I would advise them to go with whatever's coming to them. There are some individuals that are ready to go straight to the formless because all new starseeds that are being born are sort of have the capabilities for a faster tracking into this, a faster advancement and expansion than we do. So everything we do, we pave the way for the next generation. So that's how this frequency raises. With everything we learn, it then goes into this grid, this consciousness field, known as the Akashic Records, many names for this field. And then the next generation can connect with that, and then they can learn things faster and quicker. So that was my process. And who the 9 are, which is the second part of your question. Excuse my dog, he's barking. I don't know if you can hear him. He does tend to do this when I'm in the middle of an interview. Who they are is, well, they're me. They are my subconscious mind, but it's really more appropriate to say superconscious mind, because it's more than the subconscious. It's more than psychology. They're the DNA. They are the presentation of my DNA, or the DNA, which is one field that we all share. Another way of explaining them would be to say they're me in the future, many, many light years in the future. They are what I will and what we all will evolve to. That doesn't mean the 9 is what we are evolving to, 9 white-winged beings. It means the frequency that they are, and the collective intelligence and love frequency that they are is our evolution. So it's a future self. It's also a higher self if you look at the sense of no longer being in a physical body, leaving the physical body and being a non-physical entity. Then that's also part of the evolution into what they are. They're extraterrestrials. They're from another planetary system. They are in a large light ship. They are a captain and a crew of a ship. Another way of explaining them. There are many, many ways to explain who and what they are. You talk about the sort of extraterrestrial side of them, and again, that is interpreted in a very literal and linear sense. And so people think, it is a big sort of metal spaceship, and they're sort of beings with, that look like typical ETs that you might see in a film or something. And that's not what they are. They are, well, they're plasma beings, but I don't really know that much about what that means. And that's one of my most newest teachings, is the whole plasma thing that they've been talking to me about. So, I've probably rambled on for ages, but that's my story.
Well, I'm glad you went into it, because a few things worthwhile there to set the stage for this. And like you said, there are some things you just probably discussed that you had never discussed before. Those things just tend to pop up. And a couple of things about the 9 that I'd like to address, just to avoid confusion. A couple of things. The Ancient Alien series on the History Channel did a episode referring to the 9. But they speculate entirely on what that was, and they were just talking about how through ancient cultures throughout antiquity up to the present day, cultures have referred to beings known as the 9, and I'm wondering, well, could this be basically the same as your 9, but the difference is that the episode is hinting at the fact that, well, you said the 9 are a future version of you. Everybody has their own version of the 9, and could it be that the ancient cultures of the past were alluding to this, and that's what the show is speculating about? And before I give you the chance to elaborate on that, one more thing I want to point out. The Book of Man series, I interviewed Brian O., the guy who made that landmark E.T. series dealing with E.T. Contact with Humanity, which is on Vimeo and not on YouTube. And he talked about beings known as the 9, but he sort of presented them in what seemed like a malevolent light, like they didn't have good intentions. And one of the controversial things that he said in that documentary was that Alexander the Great, one thing he was trying to do was put a stop to the agenda of the 9. And I addressed that with him, and I said, well, I don't know. I mean, people like David Icke have said that Alexander the Great was basically the Illuminati's ultimate frontman from antiquity. He was trying to further the empire of the Illuminati from ancient Greece eastward to India. And, he stopped going further than India because they had a close encounter that freaked out all of his men, and they said, we don't want to go any further. So, but the thing is, he was suggesting that Alexander the Great had a good agenda to put a stop to the evil 9's malevolent agenda, while that flies in the face kind of what David Icke said, that Alexander the Great was an Illuminati minion who had evil intentions and was trying to further an empire. But David Icke, to my knowledge, didn't say anything about entities known as the 9. So this idea that maybe everybody has their own version of the 9, and the History Channel episode was sort of hinting at that when they speculated about it, and this whole controversy about what was the 9 that Alexander the Great was or was not against or pro or whatever. Any comments on these things, Magenta?
Yeah, wow, what fantastic questions and what fantastic information, which I know nothing about. I'd love to see that episode of Ancient Aliens. We are really behind over here in England, so we don't get the episodes at the same time that you do. And you are spot on when you say everyone has their own version of the 9. That's exactly how it is. So I will tell you what the 9 have told me about this. So on the Ancient Aliens, you're saying they were talking about the 9. And what my 9 have told me is the reason why they presented as 9 was to jog my memory. It was a memory trigger. It's like, we're 9. What does 9 mean? They can't come in and say, right, this is what this means. They aren't going to interpret the metaphor, everything being metaphor, for me. They give me clues and will want to jog my memory, and there'll be information coming in. But ultimately, this is for me to activate certain filaments, DNA strands, to create this new crystalline template. And in order to do that, you can't be told everything. There won't be any activation if you're told everything. You have to realize it. And it's the moment when you go, that's what that means. Then there's an activation. Or it's like, could it mean this? Could it be that? All our discussions and debates, as long as they're constructive, create activations. The realizations and the epiphanies create activations. So they give me clues. So what they have said is, this is how I can sort of interpret it as best as I can. It's still an ongoing communication with the 9 about what the 9 is. So I don't have all the answers to this. But what they're saying is, you know, it's funny they would choose me to talk about geometry and mathematics, because I was dreadful at maths at school. I was the bottom of my class, literally, right through. I failed all my maths exams. I have no maths qualifications. I was dreadful. It's like I was dyslexic for numbers. So for me to actually connect with sacred geometry in this way is bizarre. But relating what they say, there is a geometric field or geometric structure that the best way we can perceive this is number. So we know this is the number 1 to 9. Now what they're saying is there are only those numbers. There are only the numbers 1 to 9. When you go to number 10, you're back at number 1 again. You know, so it's a spiral. It turns into this spiral, and there's 1 is like the point of the spiral, and 9 is the central point of the spiral. But if you are to look at all these numbers in this spiraling way and turn them into a fractal, and if you were to bring forward one number that would signify all, it would be 9. That's what they tell me, that 9 is the number. So all the other numbers are contained within. And because I don't understand very much about maths, it's difficult for me to know. So they interpret this with me in sort of more of a 5th dimensional presentation, which is the form, as in angels and beings. But obviously recently they've been talking to me a lot in a more 6th dimensional sense, hence the transmissions in the Masters of the Matrix and Divine Architecture and the Stotzi template. Those are 6th dimensional transmissions of this, where they translate what they are and for us to formulate our structure into this cohesive sort of balance is through geometry. And so the 9 is one way of interpreting this this presentation that we are moving into, which many of us know as the 12-strand crystalline DNA matrix, the organic human template, actually becoming source aligned and individualized. So this is us reconstructing that DNA template. And there are many, many different ways we can do this. Obviously, we're using a 3rd dimensional interface to interpret these geometries. So number is one way we can do this. And the number 9 is most significant in this. Now, when I don't fully understand what they mean when they show me all this, they tend to laugh. They've always laughed at me. And I sit here and think, why are you guys laughing? The reason why they laugh is to show me it's yet again a jogging my memory. It's triggering me, because when they laugh, it means that the answer is so simple. It is so simple to them. And I'm looking for some complicated way of deciphering what they're saying. So I can only give you the message. It's an ongoing conversation with me. I am told that there are people listening to this radio interview now who will understand more than I do. And I have had people write to me and explain certain concepts within the videos that I haven't necessarily processed, and they'll explain them to me more in geometric and number form. So the 9 is all. It is the number. It is the central point of the fractal that is 1 to 9, which are the geometric building blocks of everything, and they move around in all these different shapes. It becomes mathematical, and they say to me, you multiply, so 9 times 9. And if you go through these multiplications, you will end up with other sacred numbers and sacred geometric formations like 108, 144. So this is what you do when you move into the crystalline DNA template. You're moving into the 12th strand, but really you are going 12 times 12 into the 144. Because everything becomes quantum, you're then going into other timelines and other realities. So the 9 would be the presentation of the third dimensional interpretation of that geometry. But 9 times 9 is moving outwards into this quantum multiplication. That's the only way I can really explain it. And what they're talking about here is they're talking about quantum realities and timelines and that sort of thing. So the 9 are the manifestation of sacred geometry and of this crystalline structure that is the true essence of us. It doesn't have to be done through number. It can be done through shape. And that's all in sort of my book, Divine Architecture, where they talk about the pillar of light and the horizontal rainbow bridge pathway. And this is an up and a down and a forward and a back and the diagonal. So they're talking to me about this structure in shape. But 9 is the same thing. As I said, it's an ongoing sort of journey that I'm going through with them in this. So what I would say in Ancient Aliens, if they're talking about the 9 as being entities, then that is, on the one hand, it's an interpretation of the sacred geometric living intelligence, giving it some kind of form. So that's what it is on the one hand. On the other hand, there will have been throughout history, that's beyond our known history on this planet and history within other planetary systems as well, there will have been entities that have come into the balance that we're talking about and out of balance, which is going to relate to your second question, that embody the 9 in these different forms. They're embodying that crystalline form. So they may call themselves the 9. We are the group of 9. And there may be many, many extraterrestrial entities within that field. And then there may be several sections of extraterrestrials that embody the 9. And they're different fields. Every possibility you can think of is part of reality. So yes, there may be extraterrestrial entities out there, the 9 as a higher dimensional field or a council, or as entities themselves. I can't comment to specifically what they were talking about on Ancient Aliens. As I said, I haven't seen that episode. But moving to your second question, and this is something the 9 told me quite early on. Now, when they showed me the 9, we've got this geometry going up one way into the light, and then you reverse the geometry and then go down into the dark. So there are malevolent dark 9s as well. It's true. So if we are looking at somebody saying, Alexander the Great was a benevolent person trying to fight against the infiltration of this dark 9, whether Alexander the Great was an Illuminati member or whether he was a good person is immaterial. Is there a darker malevolent 9? Yes. And this is a really good question that you asked me, because this is something that is so misunderstood in the whole New Age, truther, UFO community. Everything seems to be translated in a linear sense. And yes, we have to do that. We'll go crazy if we don't translate everything into a linear sense. But I have people write to me and say, oh, you mentioned, let's say, for example, just this particular archangel. You mentioned this particular archangel in your latest video or whatever, or your book or whatever. And I'm sorry, but that archangel is really bad and horrible, and that archangel's ruined my life. So I'm going to send your book back, and I'm going to unsubscribe from you because you're working with the dark. And I'm thinking, well, it's the same with every entity. I've had someone say to me, why are you working with archangels? Archangels means archons. That person's right. Then someone else might say to me, archangels are beautiful, benevolent, wonderful beings that can heal us. That person's right. There is a negative and a positive frequency, and it's in all things, and it's expressed in all things. It's expressed in all the archangels and all the angels and the ascended masters. There is a reverse reflection in all things. We live in a reality of polarity and duality. And so to actually say, well, this is good and this is bad, is missing the point, because you are expressing your duality in a third dimensional sense. And if we want to go forward in an ascension process, we need to express duality in a multidimensional sense and understand what the dark and the light mean. And then we go further and further and further into this, because there's, if we're looking at dimensional states, there is a benevolent, wonderful, beautiful, positive fifth dimensional frequency. There's a negative fifth dimensional frequency. And, the nine say to me there are only two frequencies, and they can be interpreted as service to self and service to others, or love and fear. But service to self and service to others is the most accurate way of explaining these frequencies. So there is a service to others 9 and a service to self 9. And do the Illuminati use 9? Most probably, but they're not my 9. But then we go a bit further into saying that my 9 tell me that ultimately the true essence of them is neutrality. It isn't flipping into the positive or flipping into the negative, for they are 0-point beings. So it's neutrality. It is potential. It's expression of potential. They encompass the positive 9 and the negative 9. But their communication through me will be through the positive, the service to others polarization of the 9, because that's where I am polarizing. So I don't need to communicate with the negative 9. However, they teach me that that side of them isn't to be rejected, it's to be integrated. Because if you reject any negative frequency outside of you, you are rejecting the negative frequency inside of you, and you cannot individualize that way. It's really difficult to do, and there's no pressure on us. There's no date that we have to do this by. This is part of the ascension process. But we can categorize energies as this is good and this is bad, as long as we understand that there are different forms of bad. For example, there's negative light, there's positive light, there's negative darkness, there's positive darkness. So there is a mirror to all things, and we have to understand that if we're going to grow as a species from one dimensional state to another, we're going to be moving from a polarized state into less polarization, more and more towards positive frequency and negative frequency as being separate from one another, and into neutrality and 0-point energy, which is just the central point of the fractal, which is the 9. That's why the 9 and 9, because that's the 0-point. 9 and 0 are the same number, is what they're telling me. And I don't understand that. And I think it would take somebody who's really clever mathematically to understand why 9 and 0 are the same number. So I hope I've kind of made sense there in explaining.
Yes, you've actually opened the can of worms to some other things I've discussed previous times on my show. And since you mentioned service to self, service to others, here's another thing that we can discuss that always makes for great conversation. Do you want to be service to self or service to others? Well, many say, well, it's obvious you want to be more service to others oriented. But then again, you have to be some degree of service to self for the simple fact that you got to get to give and you got to give to get. Therefore, if you're not service to self at all, you're totally going to get everything out of whack. Being all strictly service to others is going to cause problems. However, It has
Yes.
been said that Mother Earth, planet Earth, whatever you want to call it, was originally created as a seven-dimensional seed planet. That's what Akashic Records leader Andrew Barta says, and some people I've had on my show, like Jim Self, have confirmed that. The significance behind that, and Jim Self also did confirm this, is that um, while there is some disagreement over whether dimension and density mean or don't mean the same thing, for the purposes of
True.
this argument, let's just try to use the sense that they're describing it. Dimension, seventh dimension. The significance to that is once you get to the seventh dimension, there's no more service to self. I mean, the fifth and the sixth dimension, they're all supernally wonderful compared to the third and the fourth dimension and all, but there's still some degree of service to self. But once you get to once you get to the seventh dimension, it's strictly service to others. So in that sense, you could say that Mother Earth, planet Earth, was created as a place for the entities that reside in it to learn how to become service to others' entities. But to confuse this issue even further, some say, well, okay, service to others is the key to ascending. Well, not necessarily. The 15 beings, there are 15 beings. It's now been reduced to 6, as Andrew Bartas has said. 15 beings that were basically a conduit to all the bad things that were going on this planet. 8 of them underwent service to self ascension, which Bartz has said at the time they underwent it, it was kind of a new phenomenon in our universe. And interestingly, George Kavaslis has said he talked about in my talks with him that he had face-to-face meetings with the 6 Lords of Darkness, who he describes as a conduit for all the unpleasant things that go on planet Earth. And my gut tells me that the 6 Lords of Darkness that he describes are the 6 of the 15 beings that Bartis talks about that did not undergo service to self-ascension. Can't prove that, I can't confirm that, but it does kind of make sense that would be the case. So when it comes to how do you balance how much service to self you want to be versus service to others, and also, okay, how can one make sense of service to self-ascension when it seems so counterintuitive from everything we learn in the metaphysics community?
Yeah. And wow, another really great complex question and loads of information there. So yes, everything you're saying about the people that you've mentioned and the way that they're explaining this is all true. It's their interpretation. Mine I would explain this slightly differently. How I would say this is, if you're looking at fifth, sixth, and seventh dimension, I would see this as there is a positive service to others fifth dimensional field and a negative one, and they do not superimpose if you have polarized within the positive vibration. You're going to go into a positive fifth dimension and go through a positive ascension, and you won't come across that service to self energy. But again, this is literal interpretation. It's very difficult to interpret what's happening in words. And the same with the sixth dimension. And it's correct. The seventh dimension is when this is superimposed together. There is no duality, as in this is a positive seventh dimension and this is a negative seventh dimension. It becomes one. So every soul has to choose to polarize into a unified field. But the polarization within the fifth dimension and the sixth dimension, there's still duality there. Well, there's still polarization there, but the polarization is completely different. So say here we may have love and fear. In the fifth dimension, it's love and light. You know, that's an example. And in the sixth dimension, it will be this particular symmetrical, geometric spiral, and this one. They become so alike that the polarization is simply a reflection of the other. So polarization becomes a reflection in the sixth dimension. It's so difficult, if not impossible, to actually pinpoint a service to self and service to others. However, it's still a polarization. Then in the seventh dimension, that's when unity is in its fullness. But unity begins in the fifth dimension as well. But it's the unified fifth dimension is the polarized positive. So the way to ascend into a positive polarization or a negative polarization or neutrality, however you interpret it, is to understand what they mean to you. And I think the way to do this is to listen to several people, not just one. Read as much as you can. Listen to as many people as you can. If you're resonating and thinking, you know, this makes sense to me, if you're not resonating, it doesn't mean that that person is saying something that isn't true. It just means that we're all interpreting these frequencies within our own model, and we're all making sense of this. And some of us have models that are easy to resonate with and are the same as other people's models. So the spiritual teachers who are kind of out there and people are listening to will be presenting models of reality that people can relate to, not because, oh yeah, that sounds like a good model. It's not like that. It's more like, that's exactly the same as my model that I already had. These people have already made sense, and large groups are interpreting these higher frequencies in similar ways. So we would make sense of service to others and service to self. What does it mean? And we can interpret that in a third dimensional sense, as in the actions that we take in this reality and our behavior. So service to others we can interpret as being in service to others and serving others. Now, that could be in a loving way as a healer or a teacher or a carer, or it could be in a very negative sense, in the sense that we're completely ignoring our own needs and are utterly subservient to another who is, dominating us and controlling us. That's not service to others, but some may interpret it as that. I've had so many people say to me, I try so hard to be service to others, but I just can't keep doing it. It's burning me out and I've got to be a bit service to self. So what they mean by that is they want to serve self. Well, what the service to self that they are talking about here is still service to others. Service to others means self and other, for you are all one. Self and other are all one. So when you look at self and you look at other, you're one being. So when you serve yourself and others as equal, you are service to others. Service to self dismisses other and consumes other and uses other. For there is only self in a service to self mentality. And they will, put self above all other, to the point of eating, killing other. The reason why they do that is because in a service to self mentality, the belief system, the paradigm is, I am God and I exist. And because I'm God, as long as I exist, God exists or source exists. Therefore, it doesn't matter if I murder all these people and kill them and torture them and eat them. It doesn't matter, because they're not real. All that is real is me. For I am self. I am source. I am God. That's the service to self mentality in a sort of, linear nutshell. But the service to others is, I am God. I am self. Others are me. Therefore, we're all one. We're all the same being. So if I harm another, I'm harming myself. It's a very similar energy, and what it is an opposing mirror. That's exactly what it is, and you can interpret that as light and dark or love and fear. It's an opposing energy. And I read something the other day. Somebody written an article saying how disgusting it is that some of these spiritual teachers are actually saying that we need service to self beings in order for us to grow, and that's utterly wrong. Well, the thing is, it is utterly wrong in the third dimension, and it is utterly wrong in the fourth dimension. But when we get to fifth, sixth, and seventh dimensional consciousness, it's not wrong. It's the truth. And this is the thing. We have a multidimensional perspective here, and each perspective, as you break it down, is different. So in the third dimension, we don't need to be taught by this Illuminati cabal who wants to control us all. We don't need to have secrets hidden from us. We don't need to be hoodwinked and lied to and all the other awful things that they've done. We don't want that. We absolutely don't want it. And together, the light workers will make a stand, and together they will do everything they can as a unified force. And, they really are coming together now to stop this, because it is not needed in this reality, and we don't want it, and we will not have it. And that kind of determination, that kind of fire, that kind of no more, I am sovereign and I will not put up with it. That is the third dimensional stance. We don't do it in battle mentality or in hatred. We do it in assertiveness. We do it as the warrior, the peaceful warrior. We will not accept this, sorry. You are crossing my boundaries. And we do this collectively in the third dimension and in the fourth dimension. But when we get into higher dimensional states, what we're actually looking at is this frequency. And in order to polarize within one particular energetic, so if we want to polarize within service to others, we've gone through a cycle of free will. And that, again, is a whole other question, because in some perspectives we don't have free will, but I'm looking at the perspective where we do have free will. In order to have free will as a species, as an entity, we need to have something to choose between. If everything is given to us and there's no choice, then we don't have free will, because we're just moving along a pathway that is already designed for us and we're making no choices. And that is what we're doing on another perspective. But looking at the perspective of free will, we need to choose between A and B. So A and B within the third dimension, as it is a dense, dualistic dimension, usually A and B is good and bad, or love and fear, or dark and light, or service to others and service to self. We need to have the polarity to make the choice. And we need to look at the polarity. So when we look in a mirror, in the third dimension and in the fourth, although it's not quite so dense, but in the third and fourth dimension, we look in a mirror and we see what we are not. The reflection, the service to self reflection, the Illuminati cabal reflection is, I am not this. That is not me. I am not this, and I do not want this. This makes you look at yourself fully, all the parts of yourself, and you refine the parts of yourself that are that, because each one of us have got these parts to us. So we're refining, we are not transcending, we are refining, and we are integrating all those parts of ourselves. So when we look in the mirror on a third and fourth dimensional level, we see, I am not this. That is what I see. That is the reflection. I'm service to others. That is service to self. I'm positive polarization. That's negative polarization. And I'm over here. And that's what we do in our third and fourth dimensional interpretations. But becoming multidimensional means embracing the other dimensional states as well. So when we move into the fifth and the sixth, and I mean the seventh is something that's very difficult to conceptualize, but certainly within the fifth and the sixth dimensions, we are taking on a different perspective. So we understand that we make these choices in order to experience free will. And we then know and move into a state of gratitude for everything that we've had. It's very difficult. It doesn't mean you have to forgive the Illuminati and be grateful for them on a third and fourth dimensional level. But it does mean that there has to be some understanding of what the frequency is. And if you actually turn it all around and look at the whole service to self structure on this planet, that is so complex and so multidimensional in itself that you cannot actually say that is all evil and that is all bad, because there are perspectives within that believe that they are right. There are individuals who are there in the service to self faction and growing up in these families that believe that they are here to act as that opposing frequency and that catalyst, which they are from a higher dimensional sense. But they can take that into the third dimension and become a bit distorted, or they may stay within balance. It's incredibly complex to look at all of these different parts of the service to others frequency that's manifested on this planet, and the service to self frequency that's manifested on this planet. Within the service to others frequency, there's a lot of imbalance as well. You have people who will say, I'm positively polarized, I'm service to others, and then they are really nasty to people and rude to them and all sorts, so we're all working out what these energies mean, and there is a negative ascension and there is a positive ascension, and the balanced individuals in both of those frequencies, in service to self and service to others, there's no judgment from the higher energies as to which polarization they choose. So there's it's almost like with the service to others frequency, we can see this as a spiral or a circle of energy of all these different flavors moving round and round and round in a spiral or a circle. And within the service to self structure, we could see this as a pyramidical structure with a faction on the bottom and then others at the top. And each one has a very, very different feeling. And there's many pyramids and many spirals. I guess that's the way to explain the two frequencies.
Thank you very much. There's no question, though, that if you are of a service to others, behavior, it'll definitely come back to reward you. I myself found that out the last two times I've taken trips away from work. Spent a lot of time picking up litter when I was in Arizona and also in Bermuda for a week. And when I got back from work, I realized that a lot of things that I had to do that that I thought for a fact, oh my God, when I get back from work, I'm going to have a ton of work to do. But no, a lot of people actually were able to do a lot of work for me. So I'm thinking, okay, a little hint to self, make sure you pick up litter whenever you leave work and do a lot of other good things for people, and then you will be rewarded well when you get back to work. And well, that's not just at work, that's a lot of other things in everyday life. But it just goes to show you that being infinite consciousness does have its implications in regards to reaping what you sow. But I'd like to move on to some other things here. Well, just out of curiosity, of all the things for me to discuss on this show, but it just seems appropriate because of what's going on today. Are you by any chance in any way familiar with the Winston Trout situation?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Are you familiar with the Winston Trout situation?
No, I'm not at all.
Oh, okay. Well, then I guess you're not the person to be talking about this. Well, for those that aren't aware, I bring this up because Winston Trout, either today's the day, either his goose is cooked or he will be free because he wasn't a lunatic after all when he said aliens told him he will be saved and won't go to jail. Now, Winston Trout, he's the ultimate sovereign citizen guru, many would assert, although it's been kind of controversial. I mean, a lot of people who try his sovereign citizen solutions in commerce methods have gone thrown in the slammer a few times. Now he can say what he wants about how my disclaim just so you know, I'm not responsible for anything that happens to you. All my work should be taken with a grain of salt. I mean, many would argue if his work is obviously getting people sent to jail, it's obviously in his best interest to continue what he's doing. On the other hand, a lot of people would assert that all the stuff that he argues can be proven as fact either through law or, if not law, through genuine, simple common sense. Now, he's recently had some issues regarding not paying income tax, and he allegedly, well, some people have asserted he flat out committed fraud. He didn't pay taxes using genuine dollars. U.S. dollars. He used like his own form of currency, as the theory goes. Some people refer to this as using promissory notes. And while some would assert that using a promissory note or a sovereign citizen's own form of currency to pay something is fraud, others would assert that since we all have the right to be sovereign citizens in our own right, we have the right to exchange in whatever form of currency we choose, and we have the right to use our own currency. So from that standpoint, Winston Trout did not commit fraud when he used his own currency, his own promissory notes to pay income tax. Now, he was supposed to be sentenced. He was found guilty on many, like a couple dozen charges, and was supposed to be sentenced in August, but for reasons that are not completely understood, and I couldn't really find anything about this on the internet, it was postponed till today. And for all I know, it could have all been settled right now. And but the thing about Winston, many people thought he was a lunatic, but maybe he's not a lunatic after all when he said that he's been in contact with ETs who told him he's not going to go to jail, he's being protected. His soul has some sort of like an asterisk shield on it of sorts that says you are protected. Yeah, as long as you keep doing good and don't screw up and do harm, you'll be fine. We'll protect you. But I don't know. It remains to be seen. I'm sure there'll be something on the net about it soon. But I mean, you keep in contact with ETs. If ETs tell you you're not going to go to jail if you do no harm, even if it looks like your goose is totally cooked like his does, I mean, is that something that you should take with a grain of salt? And of course, and one more thing, this whole thing about you whether or not you can use your own sovereign citizens can use their own form of currency as exchange. Well, yeah, maybe that would make sense from a standpoint of sovereign citizenship ideology, but I mean, look at it from a historical standpoint. Anybody who understands American history would know that the main reason the U.S. Constitution replaced the Articles of Confederation was because there was the money issue. The several states of the newly found American Union each created their own form of currency, and that was causing a shitload of problems in regards to commerce. So the founding fathers realized, okay, we got to unify all of this into a collective whole so this different form of currency doesn't become a problem. Therefore, the Constitution was, well, first the Federalist Papers to explain this and everything else, and then the Constitution, which was based on the Federalist Papers, was created. Now, the Constitution is not a legal document. The Founding Fathers did not pass it with the consent of all the several states of the Union, but even so, even though its existence is an illusion, people still do take it as the law, and if you are going to take it as the law, then many are going to say, well, I don't care what you say about sovereign citizen rights. Winston Churchill, he committed fraud, because from a standpoint of how things work, there's no way that he did not commit fraud. It's a controversial issue, and since you haven't heard much about it, I really don't know if you're wanting to be discussing about this, but I know a lot of people may have this on their minds because, well, today's basically the day. I don't know if it's going to be postponed again, but if someone tells you aliens say you're not going to go to jail if you don't do harm, I mean, is it worth listening to, or should you be taken as a lunatic?
Yeah, great question. You lost me a little bit as I'm not really familiar on the legalities and history of American, law. But speaking generally, what's actually happening is right now, the awakening is so profound, and individuals are becoming sovereign, and on the journey to become sovereign, they are finding out who they are and what they stand for. There's a great many indigo individuals now that have incarnated and have reached adulthood. So this is the indigo revolution. And you've got these beings, these humans that will not be controlled and that will express their truth above anything else. So when it comes to legalities and law, there may be several different interpretations going on. Some individuals may think, well, we must follow the law and play the game until we're sort of liberated and free as a society, as a country, as a planet. Others may think, well, I'm not going to follow this law because it isn't morally right. I'm going to follow my moral alignment inside. And the indigos will stand for what they feel within. So we've got a lot of individuals as examples in all areas of life that are teaching us to reevaluate who we are. So then we're going to constantly see this. There's going to be people in the political world and the financial world and the media and the spiritual world that are appearing to be controversial figures, because this is creating debate amongst individuals. This is creating sovereignty. This is giving people these situations for them to be able to look at themselves through, acting as catalysts. And it's happening massively. It's never been this intense, I'm told, on this planet, and it's the intensity in America, in the US, is much more intense than anywhere else in the world. If you look at the geography of the world energetically, America's in the center, right in the center, and all the other countries are, if you look at America being the central point of a spiral, all the other countries are on the periphery of that, and we're getting this sort of fallback energy. So, there's such intensity in the US politically and in so many different arenas, because everything's changing. Everything is, crumbling in one area. It's breaking down, being rebuilt. In order to your question, if some extraterrestrials tell you that you're not going to go to jail as long as you don't do harm to anyone, Well, that may be a genuine, aligned communication with someone who is absolutely in a state of connection, and everything there is true and real that they're picking up. I mean, earlier you spoke about you mentioned the law of attraction, and how if you're service to others and you live in that way, then that comes back to you. Well, another form of working with the law of magnetic attraction is to have a knowing. So that in itself is a manifestation tool in the balanced, cohesive, integrated person, or the person on the path to balance, cohesion and integration. So if that person is thinking to themselves, I won't go to prison unless I harm someone, it becomes a manifestation when it becomes a belief within a cohesive individual. But then you may have another individual who is unbalanced, who is interpreting aspects of their own sort of lower consciousness levels as ETs, or they may be interpreting one particular entity as another one. That it may be that they're not cohesive, and part of them is open and flowing and loving, and another part is still closed. If you have any traumas within yourself, any buried issues, they will all be part of your manifestation. When you manifest frequency, what comes back to you is the match to all that you are, not just what you're feeling, your open heart and your visualization. It's the traumas and the buried shadow sides that are all part of the manifestation. So it may be that you are misinterpreting what you're picking up. It may be that you're creating a mixed vibration. It may be that you need to go into this situation and go to prison in order to then break that shadow aspect and unravel it and learn. I've been through that myself. I haven't actually been to prison, but I've been in situations where I've thought, well, my diet is so healthy and I meditate and I'm so spiritually balanced that I'm not going to get ill or anything. And then a month later I'll come down with an illness, and then I'll think, well, why did I get ill? So then I have to reevaluate. That doesn't mean that I wasn't cohesive and balanced, but what it means is that there were more things I needed to learn. And then I would learn that illness is not necessarily a punishment, which is a big belief in the New Age community. If you get ill and you get a sore throat, or what have you done? If you were good and you were all service to others, polarization, you wouldn't get ill. It isn't true. That is an incorrect interpretation of how things go in an ascension process when we are a human being living in a third dimensional reality. So I can't speak for Winston Shrout personally. I can't tell you whether he is a genuine, balanced, cohesive person or the other. And the nine have told me not to speak about individuals specifically. Really, that's not really what I'm here for. But I can tell you that there are different types of individuals. The reason why I can't say that is because these individuals are there for you to work with your own discernment. So you see someone on a show, say, talking about their experiences, and they may have the most fantastic experiences that they've been through, and you have to think, is this person telling the truth? Is this person lying? Is this person traumatized and thinks they're telling the truth when it didn't really happen? Is this true? If this is true, why hasn't it happened to me? This is a reflection, and we're all part of it. We're all part of the reflection. There are people who write to me and say to me that they think I'm an Illuminati paid agent, but they're not bad people. The person who's saying to me, Magenta, you're an Illuminati agent, you're paid to do this and spread all these lies, let's say, that person's not evil. That person isn't the enemy. I could easily go into battle mentality and think, well, that person, they're an Illuminati agent, not me. But no, that person is going with their interpretation. Something somewhere in the work that I've done or something I've said has, for that person, shown them that in their perspective, I'm not to be trusted. Now, whatever that may be, whether it's a reflection of themselves or whether there was something in the work that didn't resonate with them or whatever it may be, that's their perspective to work that out. And that is the conclusion that they have come to. From my perspective, is it true? No, because I have a real joke, actually. It's more than one person has said this to me, and I think it comes with the territory of being sort of out there, with controversial information. You're going to sort of get Illuminati agent thrown at you. Me and my partner laugh, and I said, has the check from the Illuminati come in yet? I haven't had my payment. And he said, no, and we laugh. But then what I'm saying is that everyone you think is an Illuminati agent, they may not be at all. And everyone you think that's not might be. And there is no guarantee. No one is going to stand up and say, right, this person's with the Illuminati and they're lying to you. This person's good. This person's telling you the truth. You have to do this yourself. And that is why it's so important to awaken this energy and this frequency within. Because I can tell you now that I can go away from this conversation. I can get up a photograph of Winston Shrout. I've never heard of him. I can get up a photo of this person. I could call that person energetically in now, but I'm not going to, because that's not what I'm here for. But I can go away privately, and then I can look at him and I can work out whether this is a genuine ET connection or not. Because I am able to see the frequency in another. I'm able to make an interpretation of that. Does that mean I'm right every time? Well, I would say it shouldn't mean that. From my own personal experience, I'm not usually wrong, but that doesn't mean I'm going to talk about that publicly, because that's taking it away from you. And that realization I was talking about, that epiphany? When you have an epiphany, it creates an activation within that crystalline matrix. It's the same thing when you learn to read others. So you learn to trust your own intuition. And if you don't trust your intuition yet, if you haven't got to that sensitive state, then you look at your life and your lifestyle and you think, what can I do to get me to that sensitive state? And it means working on anything dense that's holding you to the third dimension. And that may be diet, it may be your lifestyle, it may be your job, it may be your communications with your family, it may be traumas you haven't dealt with, it may be a television program you watched last night, it may be a dream that you had, it could be anything. So you are constantly refining and integrating and moving into a state where you're able to flow energy, raise the heart, become empathic, tune into other energetics, and make decisions and opinions. And sometimes you may not be able to. Sometimes you may look at someone and think, well, this bit of them is truthful and loving and this bit isn't. And that's what these individuals are there for. They're there as catalysts to our own empathy. They are standing as beacons for our own discernment. And that's the situation with this person, Winston Shrout. He's a beacon for your discernment, as are so many others, as is Donald Trump. That's what these people are placed there for. Because if you look down at this dimension, everything is there to create this geometric pattern so that each and every one of us may fulfill our destiny and our mission, which is to awaken and to remember and to come back to that central point and to move into this ascension process. The word ascension is used so much, and it's really not really that well understood. It's evolution, it's expansion, it's growing, it's raising in frequency, and there are so many ways to explain it. What ascension means to you is what's important, but this is about us reaching our destiny, doing what we came here to do. Why did we incarnate here? What's the reason we're here in human form? There's a blueprint that's mapped out for us, which we can change as well. So we can choose to follow it, we can choose to embrace it, we can choose to change it, because it's multi-layered. So everything that's happening right now on the third dimension, especially in America, which is the central point of this energy, is there for our learning. Because from the higher perspective, there's only one individual here. There's only one soul, and that person's you. Whoever's listening to this right now, it's you. So everything that you see in your reality is there for you. But you can interpret that in a service to self sense, where you become the central point and everything else doesn't exist. Or you can interpret that in a service to others sense, where you're aware that everyone else is you as well, all going through the same experience that you're going through, but in a different body, in a different timeline. Very similar paradigm, but a total reflection of one another. So that's my interpretation of why Winston Shrout is specifically in the forefront of people's minds today.
Yes, and I think I should say for the record, I did have him as a guest on my show, and the interview I did with him, which is called What You Should Know About Commerce and Maritime Admiralty Commercial Law, is the second most popular interview in terms of views that I've done, the most popular being one with John Lear. But of course, ever since Winston was indicted, there's been some controversial comments left on that video. So people, if you want to watch that interview I did with Winston, which was done a few years ago, watch you at your own risk, use your own discernment.
Okay, well, if I just quickly say, if you've had this gentleman on your show, then that sort of opens up a wider periphery as to your analysis of what's going on, because your show is an entity in its own right. It's a creation that you've created, and it takes on its own life form, and there will be certain streams within your show, like with my videos, my books, or any creation. Those streams within your show will be in a certain sort of layer, a certain framework, and there will be a certain, I mean, you may have actually put magical conscious boundaries into your show. And if you ever have consciously decided, I only want genuine, loving, truthful people on my show, that's my boundary. Or you may have decided, I want anyone on my show who's got anything to say that's information and that could be true. But I can see that there are some boundaries within your show, and only certain types of people will get past that boundary. Therefore, I would say that if this person has come into your show and has found your show, because there are certain types of individuals that would never even discover your show. It would never come into their reality. So if this person's been a guest on your show, then I would say that this person is more than likely the first example I gave, and somebody who is cohesive and is genuinely picking up a balanced alignment. That would be my guess based on the boundaries that I see within your show as a structure, if that makes sense.
Thank you for getting that out. But got to shift gears to some other things. Got about half an hour left, and I want to get into some things dealing with the present day and the future. Now, let's try to kill two birds with one stone here. Eclipses and the Book of Revelation and the constellation of Virgo. Well, I'm killing multiple birds with one stone here, but here's the deal. We don't really need to spend too much time talking about the solar eclipse that just happened, because you have a lot of things on your YouTube channel about that, and people can watch that to get the info. But that eclipse is basically, some would say at this point, nothing compared to the big enchilada eclipse that's supposed to happen on April 8th, 2024. I was in Charleston, actually, to see this eclipse, and I didn't see it. The clouds came over when the eclipse happened. But I'm not so pissed off about that, because I realized, well, this was meant to happen. My guardian angels and spirit skies decided not to let me see this eclipse because, well, I'm on this earth for a big mission, and the eclipse that's going to be in 2024 is going to be a big climactic point for my mission, so it only makes sense that I wouldn't see this one and be forced to wait 7 years to see that one. And I know exactly where I'm going to be to see that one. I'm going to be at the crisscross point of where the path of this eclipse went and the path of that eclipse went, which is at some town in Illinois, which, if you do some etymology on the name, it has something to do with like a star of Israel or something like that. Well, that's a whole new can of worms in of itself. But that eclipse, why it's so significant in 2024, it just so happens to be near the end of the Pluto and Capricorn astrological cycle, and Pluto and Capricorn is supposed to signal the destruction of everything that is not in humanity's best interest. And since this eclipse that just happened and that eclipse in 2024 both go across the continental United States, many have hypothesized what it is ultimately signaling is the destruction of the Roman Empire of the modern era, that is the United States corporation masquerading as the American government. Well, that's the first thing we can discuss. The second thing, the significance of the recent fall equinox, and more significant, the date of September 23rd. There are videos on YouTube about it. One significant one, which I encourage people to see, even though the date has passed, where this Christian pastor who's very metaphysically oriented talks about how the Book of Revelations 12 may have been fulfilled on September 23rd with like the constellation of Virgo, like all the planets were around it, and Jupiter moved like through Virgo in a way that suggests like Virgo was giving birth to Jupiter or something like that. It's kind of complicated and all. Maybe you know more about it than I do, but some would say, okay, this is not an accident. Something is definitely going on here. And since astrology is not a quack science, it's definitely real, because as above, so below. Yeah, that's the way the reality works. There's got to be something to this. So let's kill some multiple birds with one stone here. The eclipse that just happened, the eclipse it's going to happen in 2024, the ultimate combined significance of them both, and also what is the big deal with all this stuff, Book of Revelation, September 23rd, and the constellation of Virgo and everything dealing with it.
Mhm. Okay, well, the eclipse, I'm told, was a seed point, a very big seed point. There are many. So you're talking about another one coming in 2024. There are other stargates. There are other moments. You were also saying about not seeing the eclipse, but you didn't have to witness the eclipse in order to embrace that energy. Obviously, we didn't see the eclipse here in the UK because we couldn't, but sensitive individuals will have embraced the energy and will have taken part. This is a coming together of cosmic forces and cosmic energy and humanity. So it's the macrocosm and the microcosm coming together as one. So the day of the eclipse had no starseed whatsoever been taken part in any understanding that the eclipse was significant, say there'd been no meditation at all, the eclipse would still have happened. The energy would still have been there. But what actually happened was many people were aware of the significance of the eclipse. Many people came together in a unified meditation, which was one of the most powerful meditations that have occurred in a long time on this planet, if not always. It was incredibly powerful, and that in itself created the energetic. But a meditation on its own of that level would have created a seed point without an eclipse. But it was the two coming together that made the significance, the macrocosm and the microcosm coming together, that's so significant, created a seed point. As for the Book of Revelation, everything in there, it's an account written. I guess you could say that whoever wrote the Book of Revelation, whoever that person, individual was, or individuals were channels. They were in communication. Now, they may have been different kinds of humans to us. They may have already had a higher DNA crystalline activation, more of a DNA patterning than we have. They may already have been in a higher place. Either way, they were picking up truthful, interpreted energies for this time that they call the end of times. And yes, we're in that. So everything in the Book of Revelation is happening and unraveling. The interpretations are going to be subjective and they're going to be individual. So, as I said before, listen to as many people as you can and then make your own interpretation from a balanced point of view, because you are the only one here taking this journey. We're all taking it together, but we're all the same soul. So you must trust your own interpretation and your own alignment. For me personally, I got nothing regarding the 23rd. I'm aware that the 23rd was seen to be a significant date. I had lots of people writing to me about it saying, Magenta, will you talk about the 23rd? And I would repeatedly talk to the 9. I got nothing about the 23rd of September as a specific date. I just didn't. What I picked up was the overall energetic frequency around the equinox, with the 22nd being the central point to that little stargate, spilling out into the sort of the 21st, the 20th and the 19th one way, and the 23rd and the 24th and the 25th, and today the other way. So it was the 22nd with a little spill out either way. So the 23rd is in that energy. So it wasn't the 23rd that was the focal point that I was being told. It was the equinox, simply because of the energies of the equinox. But I was also told, and I'm not familiar with astrology very much, I just know it basically, but I was told there are certain astrological alignments and signs in the cosmos, within the heavens, that will align with many other prophecies and texts. The book of Revelations is one of them. There are lots and lots of others as well. And they're all, if you read them all or you listen to them all or you find them all, and the most powerful one is in your own intuition and in your own dreams, they are everywhere. The book of Revelations is one, and it's a major one, but it's just one. So what's happening is there are all these prophecies and there are these alignments in the cosmic movements that are mirroring these prophecies. And so, you know, if you look at the law of probabilities and you're listening to all these channels and UFO researchers and you said a pastor, you know, you listen to all these people and they're all saying similar things. Yes, there are going to be some discrepancies and some what seems like opposing opinions, but ultimately, is something going on? Is there a change occurring right now? Are these prophecies being fulfilled? And if you want to just study the book of Revelation alone as your only text, you can. But the interpretation is subjective and there are many layers to the interpretations. So what one person may see as the second coming of Christ, as in the birth or the reincarnation of the entity that was Jesus Christ being born as one person, what one person may interpret as that, another person may interpret the second coming of Christ as a garden growing somewhere, or a huge spaceship turning up, or a realization, you know.
Well, what about what I just said about the constellation of Virgo appearing to give birth to the planet Jupiter? As it was said that the is what happened on the 23rd. The planet Jupiter would have moved through like what would have been the womb of the constellation, as the guy asserted. Anything to say about that?
Only that the energy right now is a birthing. We are in that birthing energy, and all the planets are part of this. So you can zoom in on one particular symbol through astrology or through geometry or through channeling, wherever. We are in that birthing energy. There is much birthing going on, and some of the birthings are big. And what happened as a seed point from the eclipse leading to the equinox, spilling out onto these dates, the 23rd being one of them, was a birthing. So yes, that's like a large cosmic sign that's there for everyone. We can have these individually in our subjective reality. We can actually look at our car, you know, and if the tires are punctured, then what does that mean to us? We can actually decide our car is a reflection of us, or we can decide our house is a reflection of us, or the job we're doing. These geometries are everywhere, but a big one would be the cosmos. So, as I said, astrology is not my forte, but I'm aware that there are many, many alignments and many, many interpretations. Some of these interpretations are third-dimensional interpretations that are very literal and may or may not be completely true, as in, does this mean this has happened? As I said, you could interpret the second coming of Christ as a baby being born. What I was told is the second coming of Christ is now, as in the central point being the 22nd, spilling into these other dates. So if you want to take it from the perspective of the 23rd, yes, I did receive information that around that time is the second coming of Christ in inverted commas, but it is a metaphoric energy that is an interpretation of the realization of the starseeds as to who they are and them stepping into their power, which is all in my latest video. But this relates to the cosmos. It relates to what's happening out there. It relates to the section of space that we're moving into, and the particles that are coming down onto our planet, and all these things that are occurring. So what I would say to you is, this person you mentioned, you said this pastor did some interpretations. Were his interpretations correct? Well, I'm looking at his energy and, what he's saying. And yes, it's all in alignment. But there may be a different interpretation that comes out differently, that sounds on the surface like it's completely opposing, but it's also accurate. The number one interpreter is you. always you, and you take all these other individuals' expertise and knowledge because they've been trained to do what they're doing. All the starseeds, everyone out there who is a spiritual teacher right now talking about these changes have been prepared for this since birth. They're all there for a reason. So yes, the book of Revelation and everything in there, it's happening. And this is a birthing. This is we collectively as humanity and the earth are giving birth. We're in the process of labor.
That's a good thing we are, and I look forward to see what our labor is going to lead us to. And I didn't get a chance to watch that video you uploaded 3 days ago called The Second Coming of Christ, September Equinox 2017. I eagerly await watching that. I probably will tonight, see what you had to say in greater detail. And before that, there was the denouncing the New Age in favor of Christianity and vice versa, Rainbow Unity for All video. I remember you saying in that video that Christianity, you think what should be meant by that term, if anything, is people who follow Christ consciousness, and Christ consciousness has nothing to do with religion. I do have some other subjects I want to quickly discuss on the fly in the last 12, 13 minutes we got. So just to maybe keep this short, sweet, and to the point, but yet informative, could you maybe, for people that don't understand this concept, because there's a lot of confusion about this, if I were to ask you to, in 2 or 3 sentences, define Christ consciousness, what would you define it as?
Excellent. Okay, so on a third dimensional linear level, this would be somebody who is a good person, who is loving, who cares about others, who tries to do their very best in all things. Ultimately, that's the first level. But then we can move into a deeper level of Christ consciousness, which is somebody who is aware of higher dimensional states, who's in communication in their own way, who's a creative person, who is making their spiritual life a priority, who is aware that they are here for a reason, etc., and is working with a Christed energy, an ascended master, an archangel, Jesus Christ, the nine, whoever it may be. Then you can go further into these crystalline DNA formations and geometric structures that the nine would call Krista. If you want to interpret Krista as a place, a fifth dimensional place, it's like a crystal city or an emerald city. It's a template of archetypal nature that is embedded within us all, so it's part of the language of light. Or we could look at the Christ, which is a particular frequency, so we're going into frequency, which is source connection. So Christ consciousness will mean all of those things depending on where you are in your own expansion.
Thank you. Okay, another subject I want to quickly discuss here. A lot of people are going to do a double face palm when I mention this, because we're like, oh no, we've been down this road again. This is all a disinfo ploy, all diversion. But I want to set the record straight on this. One of your videos called Nibiru, Planet X, Pole Shift, and New 5D Earth. Well, first of all, the whole Nibiru Planet X thing. People have confused the living hell out of this issue by using the name Nibiru to refer to more than one planetary object. When I use the term Nibiru, I only use it to refer to the home planet of the Anunnaki that Zecharia Sitchin glorified in his landmark book, The 12th Planet. And Akashic Records reader Andrew Bartzis did make it clear that Zecharia Sitchin's first 3 books, his timelines are a little bit off, but in terms of the events, it is extremely accurate, although the Anunnaki didn't come to Earth to mine gold to shield the atmosphere of their planet Nibiru. The reason they mined gold was for other reasons, and they were lured to Earth. They didn't come here on a mission. But other than that, his events were extremely accurate in terms of what he said in his first 3 books. And Andrew Bartzis, when I did discuss this with him, because I heard rumors that Zecharia Sitchin was like a disinfo agent who worked for the CIA and the Illuminati. I'm not going to go into detail about this because I have on previous shows. We don't have time, but Bartzis did say all that stuff that painted Zecharia Sitchin in a negative light, they were all lies. He was genuine. There was a conspiracy on the part of the Illuminati to paint him in a bad light, to hide the fact that his first 3 books in particular need to be taken very, very seriously, because he knew what he was talking about. But people have confused the whole Nibiru thing by using the name to refer to other things, and in the present day this is especially true with people who have said that we have some sort of a brown dwarf-like object going through our solar system at the present moment, and some have even said that one of this brown dwarf's moons is or planets, whatever, is the home planet of the Anunnaki. Well, no, that's not the case. Sitchin's interpretation is more or less accurate. However, Mark Kimmel, ET contactee at one of Tolek's conferences back in 2016, did say that his contacts told him that the Anunnaki's home planet of Nibiru did self-destruct recently, and there's different forms of Anunnaki. There's not just the one that Sitchin talks about. It's a hodgepodge of different entities, ET entities, and the ones from Nibiru are actually no longer involved. They're completely locked out of our reality. But yet people try to talk about the return of the Anunnaki and the return of Nibiru, so many people aren't aware of that. But you did make a video about this, so I think maybe you can upset the record straight about this. What exactly were you talking about? Do you, well, I hope you agree with the work of Zachariah Sitchin. I mean, unless Andrew Bartus has somehow read his Akashic records wrong, then, well, I think you have no choice at this point but to acknowledge, yes, Sitchin knew what he was talking about. So what exactly did you want to say in this video? I don't think I watched it. It was downloaded about a month ago. Could you perhaps clear up the confusion about this? And I want to talk about one or two more things, so try to do this a little on the fly, please.
Okay, well, I can't clear up the confusion because I'm not the person who has the absolute answer here, and there is a reason for that, because, again, this is all to do with our own discernment and our own understanding of ourselves and our own interpretations. But I can tell you the perspective I have based on the information I've got from the Nine. Now, regarding Zachariah Sitchin, I haven't read his books. I'm familiar with his work through websites. I have looked at the information that he talks about. I haven't read the books. Was this person genuine? I don't normally talk about individuals, but yes, he was genuine, and his work is accurate. It is not inaccurate. However, there is interpretations, as I've said, in different layers. So this is a linear, third-dimensional, potentially somewhat fourth-dimensional interpretation of an accurate energetic. Does that mean that that interpretation is exactly going to occur exactly as it's written in that one book? The thing is, when we're given a prophecy doesn't just come to one person on the planet. It may have done in the time of Jesus Christ. I mean, that's a different issue. That was a different energy. But right now, and from other people, prophecies come to many at the same time, and they will all interpret subjectively the energetics that they are picking up. What I am told is that, and obviously because of these epiphanies that you have to go through, there are certain things that I've been told by the Nine that I must interpret only for myself and not for others. They must interpret that for themselves. So what I can tell you without going into my own personal subjective interpretation and not harming you by preventing your epiphanies to create your own crystalline structure, I will say that Nibiru is in a linear interpretation, one could see Nibiru as a planet and where the Anunnaki are from. And as you've said, the Anunnaki are it is an umbrella term for a great many different beings. It's my understanding that going to the sort of more accurate metaphor for what Nibiru is beyond the linear, Nibiru was, I'm told, there was a language, an ancient language that worked with sound, and as language developed within these extraterrestrial societies when they were first formed, and also on Earth, there were certain sounds that they used for communication. They were more like frequencies, really, because the first forming of life was outside of the human form and beyond having a physical form. And then they came into physical form. So these are sounds from the very beginning language before we even had a body. And they are interpreted into these human forms as they start to evolve. So Nibiru are the beginnings of this language. They are sounds. And what they are to us are memory triggers. So Nibiru. And actually seeing it written, and the Nine write it like Ni-BI-RU with a capital N and a capital B and a capital R, because they're codes. Nibiru is a code. It's a code that activates the DNA structure. Now, does that mean that that it's not a planet? Well, no. The Nibiru code may well manifest as a planetary body. And that is the case, and it may be more than one planetary body. And yes, Zecharia Sitchin has got a monopoly on some of this truth. He's seeing the picture in his interpretation, and it's an accurate interpretation. Maybe dates are off somewhat, yes, but there's no lies there. And it's good to read the third dimensional interpretation of something that's true. Again, like Revelation, the book of Revelation, the Bible, there are accurate interpretations coming in all over the place from many, many, many individuals. So looking for beyond that interpretation, what I'm told is there are planetary bodies in our solar system that we can't see and that we're not fully aware of. And some people are calling them Nibiru. So when they do that, they put the energy of Nibiru onto that planet. But is it the actual Nibiru that Zecharia Sitchin was talking about? Well, there's Planet X as well, and some people are saying Planet X and Nibiru are the same thing. The 9 are saying these are two separate planets because of where humanity has placed. So Planet X is an unknown planet. Yes, there are those. There are planetary bodies. The 9 have never said planet or a planet. They say planetary bodies, and these planetary bodies are perceived by us somewhat similar to comets, or they follow a path, or they follow some kind of movement that's similar to a comet, planetary bodies, but there may well be planetoids, there may be a brown dwarf, but the 9 have said planetary bodies for Planet X. But Nibiru, they're saying that this is another timeline. It's not, we are no longer in the timeline, and this may upset a lot of people, but we are no longer in the timeline where a planet called Nibiru is going to have this wide orbit and come into our solar system where we can see it outside of our window, and living on that planet are a load of ETs called the Anunnaki that are going to get into spaceships and come to Earth. That's not in our timeline. It is an accurate interpretation of an energy. So Nibiru is a code, and what they are saying is there is something in our solar system, there is something in our sector of space that we are moving into, or it's moving towards us. They describe it to me as a very large box. They actually called it a box of stars, and it literally does look like a box. It's like a huge geometric shape. And it's a box of stars because it's a geometric shape of space, but that space is in a different dimension to us. It's not the same dimension, and we can't see this great big box. If we look through a telescope, we can't see this geometric structure because it's just part of another dimension. It's actually an overlap or an edge. So it's like, they explained to me, if you were to look at, there was a film recently that explored this this concept of looking at dimensions through a third dimensional point of view. You would see different boxes and they fold on top of one another. As I said, I'm not a scientist, so I can't really give you the right terminology, but it's actually part of another dimension, and there's an edge to that dimension, and as we go into it and as it comes into us, it's creating an effect. It's creating ripples throughout the solar system. It's doing things to the sun. It's doing things to all the planets. And some of the, astrologers, some of the astronomers and people from NASA and people with telescopes can see on their technology, they can see evidence of this. But what they can see is only the edge, the dimensional edge. And we are crossing it. We are going into it, and it's coming into us, and it's raining all these particles down onto us. But that dimensional edge, because it's in another dimension and in a higher dimension, it isn't just in space. It's outside of space and time. So that dimensional edge is inside our DNA at the same time. So we've got a box of stars down inside our DNA. And as we're moving into it cosmically, it's coming into us inside our bodies as well. It's a change in dimensions. That is what it is, and it's the edge of the dimension, and that is what Zecharia Sitchin interpreted in a third dimensional sense. Based on all the research that he did, it seemed like it was a planetary body. There may well have been a planetary body that was named Nibiru, but Nibiru is a code, it's a language, it's a code to trigger our DNA, and what we are seeing up there, the return of Nibiru, yes, it's true. Planet X coming into our solar system, yes, it's true, but what is it? What is Nibiru? Nibiru is the return to the 12-stranded crystalline DNA structure. It's us returning to our rightful structure geometrically, and it's happening cosmically, and we can detect it, and it's affecting all the planets, and it's affecting the sun, and it's affecting our chemicals in our body. It's changing our structure. It's changing us from a carbon-based entity into a crystalline or silicon or silicate entity. That's what all this is. That's what Nibiru is. And when you say Nibiru, it's a memory trigger. So it's great that Zecharia Sitchin wrote this, because when you read his book, it will trigger your memory, and you will know. If you are awake and open and expanded, you can read the third dimensional metaphor. And you can see that in your mind. And as you see in your mind this planet coming into your solar system on this long orbit with Anunnaki on, and it's called Nibiru, all of that image that you're seeing in your mind when you read his work is triggering your DNA and your memory. But it doesn't mean it's literal. Now, it could have been, but I'm told the timeline we're in, we are no longer going to experience the literal return of that planet in the way it's explained. Because we've already gone through the activation within the inner worlds, we're not on that timeline anymore. And it's then hijacked by those who want to control us and used as a fear-based tool. So people can spread these stories. There's a planet coming into our solar system. It's going to disrupt everything. It's going to kill us all. And all these strange ETs are going to take us over. That is the PSYOPs, false story. That doesn't mean it was Zecharia Sitchin that did that. He was speaking accurately. It was a metaphor, and they've hijacked his metaphor and turned it into something to use as a fear-based tool. And what we need to do is work with our memory and our knowing and turn it into what it's supposed to be, which is an activation tool into our true sovereignty and into our crystalline form, which is beautiful and wonderful. And we have to reject these fear-based stories, but we don't reject Zecharia Sitchin, who was an honest person who spent his life's work doing this. And so we should honor him for what he did, because what he says isn't wrong. It's just a literal interpretation of a potential timeline that's still accurate and true. And yes, it is important to read his work, but there are lots of important works. And so trust your intuition about where you go and what you read and what you listen to. So that's my perspective on this from the information I've had from the Nine. It's not the answer, because no one person's got the answer, but that's my perspective on all this.
Well, I can certainly resonate with what you're saying. I mean, given that people like Brad Johnson who channels Adronis has said the Anunnaki are locked out of our reality, and Mark Kimmel said the Anunnaki some plan of Nibiru self-destructive. Well, that's true. Then, of course, we can't be on that timeline anymore. And just thought I'd point out that some person I spoke to at a MUFON conference who knew Zecharia, like a lot of people say, Sitchin mistranslated the tablets. Well, no, they're not understanding what actually happened. That's not what happened. Even though people like Michael Heiser claim to have shown that Sitchin's translations can't be right, because Heiser claims that there's no correlation between Anunnaki and Nibiru and the tablets. She told me, that this person that knew Sitchin at a MUFON conference, that it was actually from Greek texts that Sitchin determined and deduced a connection between the Anunnaki of Sumerian texts and Nibiru. And it was kind of a while back when she talked about it. That's all I can say about it, but many people don't take that into account. So that's opened up a lot of a whole new can of worms regarding people's false misconception that Sitchin was a fraud. But
no, he wasn't a fraud. And what they're doing is arguing about a linear interpretation. It's like one person looking at the rainbow and saying that rainbow's blue, and someone else saying no, it's not, it's pink, and having an argument. No, it's blue. No, it's pink. Well, you look at that rainbow, it's blue and pink, and that's what's happening. These are, and if something doesn't resonate with you, you just instantly think, oh, well, it's wrong, so let's dismiss it. Doesn't mean it's wrong, and it doesn't mean the person was a fraud. And looking at, the Akashic records, if you like, of Zachariah Sitchin, there was nothing fraudulent there at all. This was a hard-working, honest, dedicated person who absolutely believed he had stumbled across truth, and he had. It's a story in order to teach us, just like the Bible. And some of these things do become literal. So it isn't false, but one must look at these stories and think, okay, is this literal? Is it metaphor? And if it's metaphor, what is it metaphor for? And is it literal and metaphor? These are the questions we must ask when we read this information.
Thank you. All right, since we're past the 2-hour point, I guess we can do one more subject. Try to finish it up though quickly, because I did tell my people at my job that I try to be back by 3:30 Eastern time. So let's finish this up on a quick note, but try to make it informative though. I see a video here: return to the Garden of Eden fourth density shift. This was done 7 months ago, recording to the March equinox. Now, what's interesting about this? You suggested the return of the Garden of Eden is some sort of a consciousness shift that kind of resonates with what I've heard people like, again, Brad Johnson, who channels Adronis, say that the thing we refer to as the event. What is the event? Well, according to him, it's just the shift into fourth density consciousness. Now, he does say there's a difference between density and dimension. That's a whole can of worms I'm not going to get into. But this unique thing that you're pointing out, that the Garden of Eden is a metaphor for some sort of a consciousness shift, fourth density shift, which, using terminology, fourth density shift, it would be the same thing as the event that Brad Johnson refers to. Am I correct in saying the Garden of Eden is fourth density? And if it is, where is the evidence for that in the text that mentioned Garden of Eden, if there is any?
The Garden of Eden is third dimensional, third density, fourth and fifth and beyond. There are different reflections. So yes, it's a shift in consciousness. Now there are places within third dimensional reality where the Garden of Eden energetic is reflected. You can have your own Garden of Eden in your backyard if you want to. That reflects that energy. It is simply, on a physical level, a garden of beauty and serenity and healing that you will sit in, and you are able to soak up the healing energies of this really well constructed, beautiful frequency. But the Garden of Eden is indeed a consciousness, fifth dimensional consciousness, and fourth density. And you say you don't want to go into that. I would say fourth density and the fifth dimension is the same thing, just different interpretations, different models of the same thing. You can say fourth density or the fifth dimension, and it's the same. So within that, yes, that's where I would place the Garden of Eden. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't a physical, literal Garden of Eden at some point. It may be that it's on another planet. It may have been some kind of planetary body in transit. And it's also a shift in consciousness. That there are multi interpretations of one thing, and the time that we are in is the time of decoding the metaphor. That's what we're here to do. We're here to decode what this metaphor means. And when the nine speak and present all this in the videos, they go through several different dimensional interpretations of what the different metaphors are. So the Garden of Eden, again, is a code. It's an open-hearted energy. And the best way to look at what the metaphor is what energy do you feel when you think of these things? When you think of the Garden of Eden, does this open your heart? Do you think of beauty and joy and bliss? You can recreate this within the fifth dimension, within your dreams, within your meditations. It's a consciousness shift, but it can be recreated literally as well. And it may well have been an ancient literal place, but it's also a consciousness shift. It is more than a place. Often the nine say place and space, which means it's a literal place and it's a space. And it's within the inner worlds of antimatter and within the actual worlds of matter. There's a reflection there. And it just depends on which timeline we're in as to which consciousness and which frequency will then manifest within the actual material world, within the world of matter. So the Garden of Eden, that's what the Garden of Eden is. It's many things.
Thank you, Magenta. All right, we went over 2 hours. Hopefully, people that have lousy attention spans won't have zoned out. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of crucial stuff in this video, and you made it very interesting. I'm sure people will not tune out. So definitely, people will want to listen to this. I'm sure there'll be a nice view count on YouTube. I'll try to upload it to YouTube as soon as possible. May not be till Thursday though. I got a lot of things that I gotta catch up on after getting back from Arizona, but I do have it saved. I obviously pre-recorded it here on Skype, so it will be up soon. Got another interview tomorrow, and if I'm lucky, I'll be able to do one on Friday as well. So I got a busy weekend also. Just bear with me. I'll make sure this gets out, and when I do get it out on YouTube, I'll try to post it on social media and all and such, so people will be able to hear about it, listen to it, and learn something from it. So Magenta, it was a pleasure having you on. Everything happens for a reason, including the delays that you and I had to get you on today.
Yes.
So I think it was definitely
Yeah.
worth it. Seeing some of the things we discussed, I can understand why it happened. So
Yeah.
love having you
Same.
on. Good
Same.
luck on everything you do in the future. I will talk to
Thank
you
you,
sometime,
Andrew,
hopefully soon.
and good luck you too with all your work. You're doing amazing work. So thank you for asking me
Ditto for
to
you
be
too.
on your show. It's brilliant.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Andrew.
Bye bye. Take care.